Hello, you're listening to Coffee and Culture on Talk 1260 and 103.7 KTRC in Santa Fe, streaming at santafe.com. We're on the radio just after 2 p.m. on Saturdays and Sundays. My name is Matthew Chase Daniel. I'm your host every other week. And today I'm talking with Shayla Blatchford, who is a photographer, activist, artist. I've known Shayla through, recently we worked together on the Chip Thomas installation at the Lena Wall, and she was there for a number of days, and I was there for even more days, and painting and wheat pasting and getting that project together. So if people haven't seen that, stop by the Lena Wall on the corner of Lena Street and 2nd Street and check out that great big installation. And that installation is about the bomb factory being built at Los Alamos. And I imagine part of the reason Shayla wanted to work on that, aside from it being just a lot of fun to hang out with me and Chip and everyone else, is that the content of that is very related to what Shayla has been working on for the last bit of time, which is the Anti-Uranium Mapping Project. And there's a website and Instagram about that, and the website's very extensive. And so welcome, Shayla.
Hi.
So let's talk a bit about that project and how it came to be, how it became something important that you wanted to address, uranium mining on Navajo Nation mostly.
So, I guess it starts, well, it's like always trying to figure out the story to tell, but it's long, and then I try and shorten it, so just to give everyone just like an understanding of who I am and how I got to be where I am. My mom was born on the Navajo Nation in Fort Defiance, but then shortly adopted after, and was adopted by one Navajo man and a Choctaw woman. And my grandfather was working for the BIA, and he had the option of going to either Denver or Los Angeles for work, and they went to LA.
Were they in, when they adopted her, they were still on Navajo Nation?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like a year and a half after that, they moved to LA, and in her early childhood, they let her know that she was adopted, and she was kind of curious about that throughout her life and had done genealogy off and on, but got more serious about it in, like, I think her late 20s, early 30s. And she was reconnected with her sister, who was living out near Window Rock. And at that time I was 8 years old, and It was 1993. So we went out to Window Rock and got to meet all of our family. And we continued to go out over the years, off and on, for family gatherings. And by the time I got to high school, it was harder for me to get out there because I think I was starting to work. But flash forward to when I was about 26 and doing concert photography and kind of just wondering what I was doing with my life. Mm-hmm. I started asking those questions like, what's the most important thing in life? And you know, people are always like, family's the most important thing. And it was kind of hard for me to like understand that because I was an only child and was living with my mother, but my stepfather, and it was just us. So to try and understand what family was, it meant connecting to my mother's side and developing more of my own personal relationship with my aunt and all of my cousins. So at 26, I applied to go to the Santa Fe University of Art and Design in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I thought, I would just be a few hours away, and over time I could develop my own relationship and just start going out there and just understand more of what it means to live just with less, or closer to family, or in the Southwest in a place that is more tied to like my ancestral like lineage.
Yeah, so living with less in compared to like living in LA in the big city with the Hollywood, the industry as they call it, as the background for everything there.
Yeah, and the West Coast in general, because tried looking at other schools, because while I was thinking about connecting with family, I was also thinking of pursuing photography finally. Even though I was doing concert photography and was self-taught, it just didn't feel like it was the right path, and I was still very much interested in documentary work. So I got it out of my system to even consider schools on the West Coast because of just the whole mentality. I just wanted to get away from that. So I thought going somewhere closer to family and in the Southwest would just give me a different experience of what it's like to live with less and with the land.
And how was your experience at the University of Art and Design?
It was really great. I had already taken all of my prereqs, so I got to just focus on photography, and I focused on like audiovisual storytelling and photojournalism with Tony O'Brien, and a lot of great teachers, mentors that kind of just felt like family and became a huge support system, and that's kind
great.
of what made me stay here.
Yeah.
I didn't really see a point in coming here, getting an education, and then leaving.
Because all the connections, the reason you came to this area was because of connections. And then through being at school, you made all these other connections. And so this was the natural place to do your work.
Yeah.
Rather than just showing up somewhere where none of that mattered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it kind of really took me in, and I found like instead of jumping straight into doing a photo project on something like a self-exploration project with me and my family, I started working with other people in the community, and I went to the plaza and I went to the portal where there's all of the jewelry makers from all the different pueblos, and I met this awesome individual, Chris Chavez from Santo Domingo Pueblo, and I felt like he was kind of like my entryway into finding a more comfortable way to like ask questions maybe about myself or identity through someone else that wasn't family.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very welcoming, and I worked with him for a couple years on photography. And then after I graduated, I continued to just keep this relationship with him and be invited to Santo Domingo Pueblo just over and over in different ways. So through getting to know him, I kind of started to shift that approach and questions over into the direction of my family. And once I was able to start the trek to kind of just drive out to Window Rock, I was getting familiar with the area by going onto Google Maps and looking at the aerial view and kind of recounting the path to get there, because I didn't have my aunt's address and I didn't really want to bug my mom.
Oh, so you, at that point, you hadn't been in touch and going back to see your family there for a while?
Yeah, I was out here at school for maybe a couple years, and my car wasn't running really, and I didn't really have much.
Yeah, it's a long way.
Yeah.
It's what, 3 or 4 hours?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I didn't really have like a good paying job, and all of my money was going towards schoolwork and books. So I didn't want to start the conversation and then be like, oh, actually I can't make it.
Right.
Like until I have money in 2 years.
Right. We got to go to a break. We'll be right back. I'm Matthew Chase Daniel talking with Shayla Blatchford on Coffee and Culture. You're back listening to Coffee and Culture. We're on Talk 1260 and 103.7 KTRC. You can find podcasts of this and other past interviews I've done with different people, mostly here from Santa Fe or in Santa Fe. Look for Coffee and Culture with Matthew Chase Daniel on Spotify or Amazon Music or any of those things. And so I'm talking with Shayla Blatchford, and you were talking about this sort of slow process of reconnecting with your family out by Window Rock, and not knowing exactly where they were, and not having been out there, but having that be a increasing drive for you through your friend at Santo Domingo and your and somewhat related, I guess, to your mother's reconnection with her family at some point when you were 8. And so go on. What?
So, yeah, I was on Google Earth, and we had driven out there so many times, so I kind of remembered some of the street names and landmarks, and eventually found it. But at the same time that I found her house, I saw this giant black scar just on like the hill, over the hillside of her property. And that's when I kind of just ended up going down this rabbit hole of trying to understand what this was, and learned it was a coal mine, and became concerned about the well-being and just health of my family.
Because it was right there by the house.
Yeah.
And this is in Say Bonito, or just over the border from Window Rock in New Mexico. Mm-hmm. And those are big Chevron mines. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I've been through there.
Yeah. So there was I was just continually going down these rabbit holes, and then I eventually learned about uranium mining, and then I started to be concerned, what if I have family that's being impacted by uranium mining? And then I was like, even beyond that, even if I don't have family that's directly impacted, the fact that these communities are being treated this way is not fair. And for me, it was just really upsetting, and it kind of just sent me on this like revenge mission to just learn everything that I could and see how I could apply my photo skills and just work history to creating something that could make this personal issue for me more universal. So
right, because a lot of the mining out there happens without the permission or acknowledgement of the people who are there, and they feel powerless to affect that change. And some of that has to do with the federal government and permitting, and some of that has to do with the Navajo Nation tribal government and the resource management there. But the people who are in the way of those mines are sort of the least, have the least voice.
Exactly.
In that.
And so that's how the Anti-Uranium Mapping Project came about. And it was probably in 2013, 2014, while I was in school, in my last year, that I started writing about the project. There was this other, let's see. Yeah, it was in my gallery, museum practices, and we were doing grant writing with Marianne Redding. And so I found some grants to kind of just use as like an experiment and seeing if I could even write about what I wanted to do. And so I started bringing in the idea of mapping these locations and bringing in audiovisual storytelling, just trying to combine what can be felt as like cold, sterile, uninteresting data sometimes.
Right.
But pair it with this story, this life, something personal that could help activate something within us that might make us a little more interested.
Right. The story of the people who are affected in the places. And so my understanding is that your mission and where this is going is sort of interactive maps where there's how many uranium mining sites are there on Navajo Nation?
I mean, the EPA has shown that they've documented 500, but people out there in those areas, they'll say that there could be 1,000 to 2,000 that are, in total and undocumented.
Right. And so each of the locations, I mean, land and landscape and place is, from my understanding, very important culturally. I mean, you drive through Navajo Nation in a car and here's Church Rock and here's Window Rock and here's, they're all these navigation and interpretation of land and culture through rock formations and places. All the place names are descriptive often. And so all these different, every one of those mining sites has a different story and a different effect on the land and the people of that land, whether they're living right there or nearby, and it's a place where you go for different events or ceremonies or whatever. And it's often, I think, hard for outsiders to understand that because it's such an extreme and big and open and what some would call desolate. It's not desolate, but it's not how we think, whether on the West Coast or the East Coast or even in a place like Santa Fe nestled against the mountains. It's a different sense of land and landscape.
Exactly.
Which is fascinating to try and understand and important to try and understand as these things are navigated. So your Anti-Uranium Mapping Project and what you call counter-mapping, I think, has to do with, it's not just the map as seen from Google Earth. That's a part of it, but it's also interpretation of that and of place and stories of place and family, and that all is coming out of you and your unique family history, but also countless other people's experience.
Yeah, it's like I'm just trying to create the foundation and platform for these stories to be told that challenge the borders that have been forced upon them. Letting them talk about these sites and what the land actually is and means to them.
Yeah.
Than what we're limited to seeing in an official, quote unquote, map.
Right. And it seems like in this project, and there's different people working on similar things around mining on the Navajo Nation and making photographs and stuff. But it's like there's things that are happening this week or this year, and there's things that are maybe getting more awareness, like Pinon Plain and hauling the ore through the Navajo Nation, which is happening now or trying to happen now and trying to be shut down now. But then there's also things that are just hidden and that people aren't aware of. And I think that's important to look at both of those.
Yeah, there's hundreds and probably thousands of issues to look at that the website can eventually be able to highlight. But right now, while I have, a voice, I'm just trying to connect with other people and focus on the main issue, like you said, which is the illegal transportation of uranium ore from Pinon Plain Mine up to White Mesa Mill through the Navajo Nation. And I'm trying to highlight that and then also focus on Church Rock, which is where the largest nuclear disaster in the United States happened in 1979, where 94 million gallons of toxic waste leaked into the Puerco River and went 80 miles downriver. And, I'm not sure if that's where they just decided to stop testing or studying the soil.
At the end of the 80 miles,
yeah.
Or just all soaked in by then. And that went through Gallup and into Arizona, I believe, right?
And to Sanders and...
Yeah, and got very little. That was within a few months of 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania, which got huge coverage, and it was a much more larger release of toxicity and radioactivity into the environment, and it got barely anyone's ever heard of it.
So it's like I'm trying to show these two events.
We got to go to another break. We'll be right back. I'm talking with Shayla Blatchford about the Anti-Uranium Mapping Project. You're back listening to Coffee and Culture with me, your host, Matthew Chase Daniel, and talking with Shayla Blatchford about her anti-uranium mapping project. And there's you can learn more about this, and it's an extensive website with a lot of interesting information. And there's also Instagram account. So the website is anti-uraniummappingproject.com. So go there and check it out. And the Instagram is Anti-Uranium Mapping Project. And you also have some other Instagram accounts about your photography and other things. But those are related but not the same. So the transport, the pinion. So I'm going to give a brief description from what I know of Pinyon Plain, but you correct me or add more, which is that this is near the Havasupai tribe nation and the Grand Canyon, and the Biden administration recently put a moratorium on permits in a huge area, millions of acres maybe, around the Grand Canyon. But because this permit for the Pinyon Plain was issued previous to that in the 1980s, it's not covered by that moratorium. And as Los Alamos gears up to make bombs and the world gears up to make more bombs, uranium is becoming more valuable than it's been since the 80s when a lot of these mines were active. The corporation that holds that permit has decided to start mining that ore out of the ground there at Pinyon Plain and trucking it to Utah for processing and sale to I don't know who. But the Navajo Nation passed a law prohibiting transport through Navajo Nation of uranium without special permission, which the corporation ignored. And Bo Nygren, the president of Navajo Nation, said you can't do this, and a bunch of people came and blocked the road for a while, and it made some national news briefly. And I don't know what the status of that whole situation is right now.
Yeah, right now I believe they're negotiating with, tribal leadership is negotiating with Arizona in how they'll allow transportation to resume, which is, I can't really speak for the Navajo tribe. I don't live out there, I live here in Santa Fe. But me, as just an observer and, just being aware of history, it seems really frustrating that there's a negotiation even happening. If something's illegal and you don't allow uranium transportation to come through your community because it's hazardous and unsafe, then there should be no negotiation. But what's happening is they're discussing and trying to find, certain windows of time during the day that are safest, and
right,
allowing them to transport only if the weather is good. And instead of 4 days notice, I think they're asking for 2 weeks notice for uranium to be transported through. So they're going through a negotiation and discussing things like that. And I don't know if it's a pause for 6 months, but during this pause, the uranium that's being mined and extracted from the land is having to be stored at Pinyon Plain Mine. So, is that covered? Is that...
Because they're extracting it all the time, and until they can transport it, they got a big pile of ore somewhere.
I believe so.
Yeah. And there's just so much bad history. So anything, in a way, it's allowing it to happen at all seems like the wrong thing, and trying to stop it totally is a very difficult thing because there's so much power and money and behind it. It reminds me of the obelisk in Santa Fe that's got, has had this horrible inscription on it for years and got torn down, and now there's all this controversy about whether to put it back or take it down. And some people are saying, let's put it back up and put an interpretive plaque that describes, why that was inappropriate and what it means and all of that. But there's something, to me, it's like there's trauma and toxicity in the rock at this point after 100 years of that being there. No matter what you do, if you put it back there, that's still there. And that's sort of how I look at the uranium mines on Navajo Nation. It's such a toxic legacy and a destruction of the culture and the people out there, that anything that you do now, no matter how many safeguards you put in or whatever, there's still that traumatic, toxic legacy that any new uranium mine is evoking.
Right. And like I was saying earlier, with me wanting to highlight Church Rock and Pinyon Plain Mine, I'm trying to focus on Church Rock and say, look at this huge disaster that's still never been properly cleaned up, that people have never been properly compensated. There's so much sickness happening. How can we continue to allow uranium mining?
Yeah. Yeah, we have that at Los Alamos right here in Santa Fe, too, just a few miles across the valley, where they just did some studies, and I believe this is on your website. There's reference to checking levels of contamination in Los Alamos Canyon that are way high, and they're wanting to build a big bomb factory there and do a lot more possible contamination. And it's and they're saying, I went to this meeting with people from the DOE up at Buffalo Thunder a couple of months ago, and they're saying, well, their response is, it's a different time. We realized things were bad back then, and now we're going to do better. And it's and then someone stood up and said, if you're going to do better, why don't you clean up what you did before and then talk to us about doing better? Because we can't trust that you're going to do better because you're not even dealing with what you did that was wrong.
Yeah, and you can't even prove that you can even properly clean it up.
Right.
And explain to people what remediation actually looks like. It's you dig it all up if you can, and then you put it in the ground somewhere else.
Right.
And we don't have enough space for that. Or they want to expand the waste isolation pilot plant, but that was just supposed to be for, materials during the Manhattan Project. And I think they're wanting to expand it for tailings and other...
Right. We have nuclear power that, ends up with toxic waste that there's never been a place to put that. They tried to open Yucca Mountain up near Las Vegas, and that got shut down, I believe, because it's not good. When I first moved to Santa Fe, my wife was very involved in Business Against WIP, which were getting local businesses to oppose the opening of the waste isolation pilot plant down there in Carlsbad. And they were successful at delaying it for years and at getting a bypass built around Santa Fe, the 599, which ironically was built as a way to take the waste from Los Alamos, not through the center of Santa Fe. But as time has gone on, that's a new part of Santa Fe. There's a highway there now with exits, so people go and build houses and businesses and stuff out there. And so the thing that was made to getting it away from the city has drawn the city to it, which is humorous and horrible. So, I don't know. It's we have to go to another break, but all of this is, there's ways of delaying things, there's ways of stopping things, there's way of just making people aware of what's going on and what's important and what the effects of it, and we're all implicated. You know, we're here with our cars and our refrigerators and our all these things of our modern life that we value and rely on, and it's all implicated in this industry. It's difficult. All right, we'll be right back. You're back listening to Coffee and Culture with Matthew Chase Daniel. I'm talking with Shayla Blatchford about the Anti-Uranium Mapping Project. A couple things that you have coming up. You just, a couple days ago, had a show open at UNM at the Architecture and Planning building across from the Frontier restaurant in Albuquerque. And it's a show of photographs and information about the project. And your photographs are very compelling, and they're both photographs of people and of people of protests, but also photographs of mining sites and Church Rock and other places shot with a drone usually. So there's, you know, in looking at them, there are these ones that are compelling in this odd way of this sort of black gravel rock in these weird geometric shapes. Is that covering over tailings in places that have been quote unquote remediated, or?
Yeah, I think that photo just lives on my website. That one is the disposal cell at Lake Ambrosia, which is just above, it's near Grants, above like Thoreau and Blue Water. And yeah, that's where kind of just like all of the tailings or just radioactive waste material is stored underground under this. It's like a giant tombstone, or just like grave in a sense, where
right.
Everything's kind of just packed in there and then sealed, and then it's fenced off. And
right. Yeah, they're very kind of foreboding, those big black forms.
Yeah.
And then there's others, like you have a photo of Church Rock of the tailings pond or whatever, which is strange colors. And this, is that the pond where the dam broke, or was that a different place?
That's the same location, but the dam was just below that, and yeah, same size, and the original wall was made out of, I'm forgetting the geological terms of what type of material it was made out of, but it was an earthen dam, and that broke and cracked, and yeah.
Right. And those things go on. I mean, was it a gold mine in Colorado that the same kind of thing, a dam broke and it leaked tons of toxic waste into the San Juan River that flowed down into Navajo Nation?
Mm-hmm. Through the San Juan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, all these, the lessons haven't necessarily been learned that one would hope.
Nope.
Right. So there's that show that people can go see at UNM in Albuquerque at the Department of Architecture and Planning, and there's information about that on Shayla's Instagram, which is Anti-Uranium Mapping Project on Instagram. So check that out. But also this coming week on Wednesday, September 18th, you'll be in Gallup giving a talk about all of this and photography, and that's through the New Mexico History Museum and Gallup Arts and UNM Gallup. So that's in the 5:30 to 7, I believe, at UNM Gallup. And you can find out information about that also probably on your Instagram and other places. So you can learn more about Shayla's stuff there. So how this work you're doing seems both very sort of universally important and educational, but also very personal to you and sort of your connection with your family, what you were talking about at the beginning of the show. And that sounds exhausting and difficult to negotiate. Is that a challenge to sort of put yourself and dive into this work that has to do with trauma and destruction? And
I think the fact that I've been thinking it over and writing about it for the past 10 years, and that life has taken me in all these different directions, and that I haven't been able to just jump right into it as soon as I started writing about it 10 years ago. I think it's great that I've just let it kind of evolve on its own. So with where I'm at with it now, it's like even when the topics do get dark and situations get really heavy and I feel like nobody hears me, it's just, I'm able to just remind myself that I feel called to do this work, and I get energy out of putting work and research into it. Mm-hmm. So I'm grateful for that. And like a thing that I do struggle with is that I am, a very sensitive person, and the project is about trying to instill empathy through sharing these stories and information. And so as I do this work, I feel like I am able to kind of continue on with it because I'm not directly impacted. I'm able to continue to see the bigger picture of the project and the mission. So I'm able to collect these stories and information and share them as I go, and know that in the end I'm trying to create a platform for these people who are impacted to share their story and to have ownership of this information and this website. Like, this isn't for my career benefit or anything. I'm just trying to steadily work and get these things in place, so when it's ready, which I feel like might be could even be like several years, to when it's actually creating change and making a big impact. But during that time, I feel like I just will continue to have my lessons of how to slow down and be tuned in to what people need and what they're saying and what the feedback is, and which is kind of where I'm at with the project now, which is I'm doing a lot more workshops and community engagement, and I only have 5 of the 25 interviews that I want to complete. And so it's step by step and pivoting and being intuitive to where the project wants to go. And right now it's having a touring exhibition, so these photos will continue to move around. We'll see where they take me. And I never want to speak for anyone or any group, and even though I'm focusing on the Navajo Nation, I feel like that helps me just keep a narrow focus to see where we can create change and make an impact. So it's just starting there, and then ideally the project will kind of like widen up to even be like a global kind of website, and we can have all communities, impacted communities who have like extractive corporations coming in, and allow these communities to adopt a manual of the website and be able to talk about, how do they actually want to access clean energy? How do they want to negotiate with these corporations? Should these minerals be extracted? So in the end, it's just a giant educational kind of hub and community board.
Right. And I imagine there's support, community support through the people, your other activists who are working in this field, through the people you're interviewing, that you make that connection and you take that time to talk to them and record them and have a place for them to tell their stories. I imagine that's a difficult thing to negotiate, to get that access and to get that trust. But I also imagine it's very healing and meaningful for you to be able to continue that work, to be able to give that forum for people to have a voice that maybe haven't had a voice.
Right, and as I continue, telling those stories, I also want to open up the website so anyone can load their own story, and it doesn't have to be through my edit.
Mm-hmm.
And they can interview their family or share their own personal story, load their own photos, and kind of just have a little more ownership and control of where this project is going.
That's wonderful. That's great. We're out of time. Check out Shayla's work at Anti-Uranium Mapping Project.com or Anti-Uranium Mapping Project on Instagram. Also, I think probably on the website and on the Instagram, there's a link where you can donate to this project to help keep it going. So consider that if you've got some extra money. I know you recently got a grant from Anonymous Was a Woman out of New York, which is great. Congratulations on that. And you're doing good work, and thank you for doing that.
Thank you for your interest and taking the time to help me share my story in this project.